Thank you. Thank you, Judge. Picking up what you were talking about a minute ago, when we came in here a couple hours ago, we didn't have any sound. We didn't have any light. We had this set up, and I'm looking down at this, and we were trying to figure out how to work all of this stuff. And Barbara and Andy here have been working nonstop, and thanks to them, we've got some light, we've got some sound and so forth. And I'm all rigged up. Andy, thanks, man. I've got stuff here. And so anyway, thanks to y'all, and thank you, Barbara, for setting this thing up. You and I have been talking about doing something like this for quite some time. And Judge, I appreciate the introduction. And this is an exciting period. Now, I still can't see the thing, so I'm going to get down here with it. Allow me to start off with a quote, and I think you know part of this quote. "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." But in Texas, he has always had plenty of help. And that's true. These words were written in the book 10 Texas Feuds by Dr. C.O. Sonnichsen, who was the first researcher to seriously study the blood feuds of Texas. I had the privilege of working with Doc during the late 90s, and by the way, with Elmer Kelton too. He was a good friend on 3 projects, including the Harl Higgins feud. There were more old-fashioned blood feuds in Texas than in any other state or territory, and they occurred over a 3/4 of a century period, starting with the Regulator-Moderator War of the 1840s that happened in East Texas, and concluding with one I wrote a book about, the last blood feud, Romeo and Juliet, West Texas style. And it happened in this area in the 19 teens. 3/4 of a century of this kind of thing. Man, we would have whipped the Hatfields and McCoys all over the place. They didn't dare come down to Texas. In fact, in that Regulator-Moderator War, we killed 3 times as many people as the Hatfields and McCoys did. I say I've had the pleasure of writing and speaking about these feuds. There's nothing more dramatic, you see, than life and death conflict. And when these life and death clashes take place in an Old West setting, there's a special appeal. Now, the Harl Higgins feud of the 1870s involved cattle theft, pioneer Texas ranchers, saloon shootouts, ambushes, a full-blown street battle, running fights in the countryside, lynchings, and murderous vendettas by night riders. The Harl Higgins feud was cow country drama. The Harl brothers, my goodness, they were hard-drinking, quick-triggered lawbreakers who were magnets for trouble all their lives. And one of those posters we have has a list of the Harl brothers. There were 7 of those guys. They had a sister, too. And only one of them died in bed. And he had to jump bail to be able to get out of Texas to do that. But anyway, yeah, there's the Harl brothers. And their daddy got killed in action, too, when he was only 48. And man, those guys just kept getting blown away. I've got an anecdote to tell you about them, perhaps when we're out and about later. Now, Pink Higgins was raised on the Texas frontier. He is a wonderful example of a Texas pioneer. He was a skilled gunman who always preferred a Winchester. I never saw a gunfight about him in which he used a pistol. He preferred a repeating rifle, a lever-action rifle. Pink Higgins was a gunfighter of the first rank, as the judge suggests. He participated in as many shootouts and killed as many or more adversaries as did much more celebrated shooters. He killed a lot more guys than Wyatt Earp, than Doc Holliday, Bat Masterson, Pat Garrett, certainly than John Ringo, and most certainly the Sundance Kid. Only a very few gunfighters ever engaged in a greater number of deadly encounters than did Pink. Billy the Kid did. During the last 4 years of his life, the Kid, ages 14 to 17, he got involved in 16 shootouts. Now, if you'll think about it, 16 times you go to your guns, that's a lot. He kind of asked for it. Ben Thompson, from Texas. Ben Thompson started using his guns against adversaries when he was a teenager. Wild Bill Hickok, not quite as many as you'd think, but boy, was he deadly. And then there was Wes Hardin. He was the son of a Methodist preacher, and he was the sorriest old thing. And he got in one gunfight after another, and he usually tried to shoot first. And he drank a lot and so forth. And then there was Killing Jim Miller. Killer Miller. Most of his killings were assassinations, and he was the West's premier assassin. Now, Pink was not kill crazy like the psychotic Hardin. He was not a problem drinker like Holliday and Thompson and a host of other Westerners whose drinking bouts led to gunfights. Indeed, unique among front-rank gunfighters, Pink was a hard-working family man. He was the father of 9. Now, there were some guys who killed more people than he did, but none of those gunfighters ever sired as many kids as he did. 9 kids, he was the champion there. And he earned a living as a pioneer rancher, trail driver, stock detective. And here's the thing. He was a cowman, but he was brought up on the Texas frontier, battling Comanches and rustlers and anybody else who challenged him. Like any prudent frontiersman, Pink was aggressive in defending himself and his interests. In order to survive on the frontier, a man really had to have a strong sense of danger and a willingness to take direct action. Although Pink held firm moral and religious beliefs, he pragmatically regarded his killings as a necessity of frontier life. He was like Wild Bill Hickok in that regard. And like Hickok, he wasted no time on regrets. He and Hickok both would just talk matter-of-factly about their shootout. You ask him about some shootout, and he'd just tell you, what all kinds of details. He found it necessary to use his guns in self-defense from the time he was a teenager until he was in his 50s out here. Barely out of boyhood, he rode with older men to protect his exposed homeland against Comanche war parties. He killed rustlers with scornful abruptness. He stood up to opponents in deadly face-offs, and he led a faction in this Higgins feud. During his last gunfight out here, he was already in his 50s. He killed his opponent in a classic mano-a-mano rifle duel. In between shootouts, Pink rode the range as a cowboy, rancher, stock detective. The cowboy became, as you all know, I'm sure, the world's #1 folk hero. And the Western movies and novels that helped put him there also gave the gunfighter mythic status. So, Pink's life of violent adventure on the cattle frontier would qualify him for mythic status on 2 counts to later generations. One of them was cowboy, trail driver, and so forth, and the other one was gunfighter. The fact that Pink is not as well known as other legendary Westerners has little to do with the quantity of his deeds. But he was not murdered like Wild Bill Hickok. Hickok was just sitting there playing poker, and a guy came up behind him, shot him in the back of the head. He did not have a tragic flaw like Doc Holliday. Doc was hit with tuberculosis when he was a very young man, still a dental student, and he was doomed, and he knew enough medicine to know it. He was not killed at 21, tragic short life, like Billy the Kid, and he was never the subject of a charming movie like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. That movie about them, I think, is literally the most charming Western ever filmed. And even though he fought in many gunfights, not a one of them was at Tombstone's OK Corral. My great-grandfather, Jeff Standard, and I thought I had a picture of all those guys there. Oh, it's behind me. Okay. Let's see. It's directly behind me. The guy seated second from left. You can see this. The guy seated second from left is my great-grandfather, Jesse Standard. And then the guy at the end of the row is, there's Pink. Pink is... Okay. This is my great-grandfather, and then that's Pink on the end here. And they were, my great-grandfather was, his home was in Lomita, except he was on trail all the time. And he had 3 little boys, and then his wife died at the age of 22. And one of those little boys that got orphaned was my grandfather. Then he remarried and had a whole bunch more kids. And he married a lady from Tuscola, and that's where they were. Anyway, that's my particular connection to him. Back, my mother, Jessie Standard O'Neill, she was named after her cowboy grandfather. My grandma had a thing about, she had 8 kids, 4 boys and 4 girls, and she called, I had an Uncle K, Uncle K. I had, I had Aunt Walter, and my mother was named after her grandfather, and Grandma just kept throwing those names in the wrong directions. Well, anyway, I wrote a couple of magazine articles years ago about the Harl Higgins feud. So I was in Lampasas for a family reunion in the late 90s, and I was approached by 3 descendants of Pink Higgins, and they offered to provide me with all manner of materials, legal documents, previously unpublished photos and so forth. If I would just write a biography of Pink, well, they didn't have to ask me twice. You know, sure, I'll do that. And I'll tell you who they were. One was a physician named Dr. John Higgins, and he was from Lampasas, and he was, I guess, grandson of Pink's oldest son, who was killed out here, assassinated over in Claremont. And then Betty Miller Giddens, she was connected 2 ways, actually, to the family. And Bob Terry from Roby. He was a crop duster over there, and he's the one who first got in touch with me on behalf of this trio of people. And boy, they had the goods. So I got into it, wrote the book, and John Calhoun Pinckney Higgins was born in 1851 in Georgia. Then, in 1854, when he was 3, the family moved to Texas in a large wagon train. The first Texas home for the Higgins family was near Austin, which in the 50s was just a log cabin village. But early in 1857, the family did move to Lampasas County, and that was in the first year of its existence. Land was readily available. So, okay. The Higgins Ranch was established several miles northeast of Lampasas at Higgins Mountain, and another nearby mountain produced Higgins Gap. Well, I was working with the editor of True West at the time. True West had True West magazine, Old West magazine, Frontier Times, and he wanted gunfighter stuff. He went through a period where he wanted all that stuff, and so I just kept writing stuff for him. He was from Montana, and when I sent him pictures, now remember, this is hill country. When I sent him a picture of Higgins Mountain and Higgins Gap, he just snorted. You know, he was from Montana where they had serious mountains, and he didn't think much of Higgins Mountain. I did. Thought it was pretty good. Comanche raids were so common back then that the Higgins family retreated to Bell County, Belton, but returned to Higgins Mountain in 1862. Comanche raids would continue until 1874, along with rustler forays. Now, Pink's father was with pursuit posses. We didn't have any military presence. There weren't any forts nearby. The closest fort was Fort Gates, and it didn't last very long, but it wasn't close enough anyway when the Comanches had just hit you. And so his daddy, Pink's father, went out with the pursuit posses, while Pink, the oldest son, stayed home to guard the family. Well, Pink was big for his age, and soon he was riding in pursuit while his daddy stayed to guard the house, okay? On 2 of these expeditions, teenage Pink was wounded. Once he was hit in the leg and once in the foot. They were in camp. There was a large pursuit posse going out, and they had a Tonkawa scout. Now, the Tonks hated Comanches because Comanches had displaced them from their homelands. And another thing, this had to do with some, I guess their religious beliefs. They were cannibalistic as well. So Pink, they're sitting there, and this Tonkawa scout is squatting beside Pink, and he had meat on a stick. And Pink said, "Quit letting that greasy beef drop on my buffalo." And the Tonk said, "Him no beef, him Comanche." Yeah. At 18, Pink was with a posse that chased down a rustler, and Pink was the one who adjusted the noose. The thief said, "Boys, I know I'm going to hell, and I want to arrive in time to find a partner for the first dance, and he spurred his own horse and, in effect, committed suicide. As a teenager working for his father, Pink began acquiring his own cattle because that's the only way his daddy could pay him off. They didn't have cash. At 17, in 1868, he helped drive a herd along the famous Goodnight Loving Trail up through New Mexico to the north. And thereafter, Pink was a frequent participant in trail drives. In 1871, Pink was part of a group which bought 900 yearling steers at 50 cents each. And the very next year in 72, they bought another 1,700 yearlings at $1 each. Granted, the price is double, but still, that's a good deal. So they had all these cows for very reasonable prices. And in 1873, the next year, they drove them all to Kansas. And it just so happened they hit it when the market was good. You know, the markets would bounce around like crazy. Well, the market was good there, and that turned out to be Pink's best bonanza. And that's what kept him trail driving. Next, he did lead a drive to Kansas City, and from this point on, he was busy as a trail boss and as a cattle buyer and as a family man. He married a young widow named Betty in 1875. She had a daughter. She brought her daughter to the marriage. And then Pink and Betty had 3 kids, son, daughter, son. And the brothers-in-law, boy, they were all congenial with Pink, and they all worked together on these drives. Some of them were in that picture that we were passing around. Now, I can't go very far without talking about the other side, the Harrell brothers. The Harrell clan, 7 brothers, they came to Lampasas County in 1857. That was the same year as the Higgins family. The boys often fought. The mother, Elizabeth, said, well, I guess so. I raised my boys to be fighters. And brother, it took. 1868, they decided to go to California, the Gold State. Off they went. They got to New Mexico, and man, they got hit hard by Apache raiders. And old Sam got killed. The father of all these sons, he got killed. He was only 48. And another son named John, he got killed in these fights. And there's one other thing. They already had lost a son in the Civil War. Their oldest son died during the Civil War. So they're starting to get whittled down a little bit. They returned to Lampasas after losing their father and another brother. Elizabeth, she got a house near the square in Lampasas. And the brothers began rebuilding their herd. They did it with a long loop. The Harrell Ranch, now at Mesquite Creek at this point, which was 10 miles east of Lampasas. The brothers drank. 3 of them got involved in 1873 saloon fight in which Sheriff S.T. Denson was wounded by Mark Short. In 1876, Short was killed in a saloon by the sheriff's son. Vengeance is mine. Don't forget that. There were many saloon fights in Lampasas. Beautiful little town today, but boy, once upon a time, it was the roughest town in Texas so far as saloon fights go during the 1870s. I mean, you can add them up and see, it's just unreal. And then, by the way, in the 1880s, I got to add this, Tascosa was the toughest gunfighter town. There were more gunfights in Tascosa during the 80s than there were anywhere else in Texas, oddly enough. Then there really got to be one on March 14th, 1873. There was a large squad of state police that came to Lampasas, came down from Austin, and they were under a Captain Williams, and they were tasked with arresting the Harrell brothers. Well, golly, this Captain Williams, he didn't like that assignment, and he drank his way all the way down to Lampasas from Austin. They got to Lampas, and he sent some of his men scouting around to see if they could find any of those brothers somewhere. But he thought he probably knew where they were. There was a saloon on the west side of the square, and he took 3 of his men, counting himself 2, that's 4. So 4 of these state policemen walk in to that saloon. And Mart Harrell was there, and he was he had a very short fuse. And here come these officers of the law, and boom, they start shooting. Mart himself got shot by Captain Williams, and he was very badly wounded, but he would recover. And then, kaboom, they opened up, and they flattened all 4 of those state policemen. 3 of them died on the spot right there, and the other one lingered a while, and then he died. I was telling you about Lampasas being the saloon shootout capital of Texas for a while. That is the only shootout in the history of the West, only one, in which 4 officers of the law were killed. There have been 3 or 4 in which 3 officers were killed, but that's the only one where 4 guys were killed. So what the brothers did, they carried their wounded brother to the mother's home. Pretty soon, state police came and arrested him, and they wound up in jail in Georgetown, which had a good jail. And so his wife gets to come and try to nurse Mart back to health and so forth. And when the brothers heard that Mart was getting better, they hit that place with a night raid, had to shoot a couple of citizens to get their way, and they broke their brother out of jail. And they headed off to New Mexico again. They relocated to Lincoln County. At that time, Lincoln County, everybody's heard of Lincoln County, Billy the Kid, the Lincoln County War and all that. Okay, that place was the largest county in the United States at that time. It's been whittled down some now, but it was the largest county in the USA. It was the entire southeastern quarter of New Mexico. And they got there, and the Billy the Kid stuff would happen a few years later. When the Harrells got there, they had inevitably the Harrell War. And several guys got killed, including their youngest brother, Ben. So the brothers are still getting knocked down a little bit. So they came back to Lampasas. They had to rebuild their herd. Now, Lampasas, remember I mentioned there was Comanche violence till 1874. You had all this saloon fighting. So Lampasas was a natural site for a blood feud. Gunmen like the Harrell brothers and Pink felt free to go to their guns. In May 1876, Merritt Harrell stole a yearling from Pink's range and sold it to his brother-in-law, who owned a meat market in Lampasas. Pink rode into town and saw the yearling tied up in the town square. It is now the courthouse square, but they didn't have a courthouse yet. The only courthouse Lampasas ever built was in 1883, and it is a beautiful example of courthouse Gothic. It's one of the finest, and I think maybe the 3rd oldest in use in Texas today. But anyway, every now and then they ask me to come up and do a program in there. Love doing it in that historic old place. So anyway, Pink sees his yearling tied to a live oak tree on the public square. He doesn't like that. He retrieved his animal, and he swore out a warrant in court. The yearling was proved to be Pink's. And it was also proved that Merritt, and that, let me use the legal language, he had no claim whatsoever. But the verdict came down not guilty. And Pink, golly, Pink was still in his 20s. Man, he was a hair trigger. So Pink warned Merritt. He said, all right, I'll never bother with the law again, but I will settle a matter myself with a Winchester rifle. So he was giving him fair warning. January 22, 1877, 2 days later, Pink and his brother-in-law, a big old guy named Bob Mitchell, and 1 or 2 others, they rode into Lampasas on the hunt. Winchester at the ready, Pink walked into Merritt's favorite haunt, Jerry Scott's saloon. That was the saloon where the 4 state policemen had been gunned down. Merritt was standing, it's January, cold. Merritt was standing back at a pot-bellied stove in the rear. Pink, who's already got his rifle ready, he said, Mr. Harrell, this is to settle some cow business. Bam! Shot him. That was all the warning Merritt got. He'd already been warned. And knocked him on his back. Well, he got up, unsteady, and he leaned on this guy named Irvin. I have no idea what Irvin must have thought, get away from me, And Pink by that time has levered his rifle again, kablam! And he knocks him on his back again. And then, for good measure, he walks over to him and shoots him 2 more times. Now, that's the way to start a feud. And so Merritt's dead, and now Pink's got his blood up, and he led these men that were with him toward the Harrell Ranch, which was several miles east of town. And lo and behold, soon they encountered Tom Harrell. And some of them wanted to kill him. But Big Bob Mitchell said, no, by God, you can't kill an unarmed man. Reluctantly, they let him go. At that point, Sheriff Albertus Sweet we'll see Sheriff Sweet in a minute again. He sent for Texas Rangers. The famous Frontier Battalion of Texas Rangers was scattered around, and Company C was headquartered in San Saba, which is 36 miles from Lampasas. So 16 Rangers came with a posse, and that included Mart and Tom Harrell. And so they arrested 4 Higgins partisans for complicity in Merritt's murder. One of the guys got released because there was a lack of evidence. 2 of them posted bond. They let them out. The 4th one, he didn't have anything. And so he's caught, but he later produced an alibi. So let him go. Pink, who's the one who did the shooting and everybody saw it, they never came after him or anything. He remained at large. So on Monday, March 26th, Tom and Mart were scheduled for an appearance before the district judge in Lampasas. So they started riding in from the east part of the county. And Pink, the detailed Texas Rangers, came to town in case there was trouble. Well, Pink was smarter than that. He set an ambush a few miles outside town at a place. You can see the sign today. Lampasas is proud of their feud. A big old sign says, it's just a little tiny creek kind of a thing, but it says Battle Branch. And sure enough, the 2 brothers came riding up to Battle Branch, and they got ambushed. And Tom was knocked out of the saddle with a bullet in the hip. Mart nicked in the neck. His horse bolted, but he cleared his Winchester, and he charged those guys. And they were concealed, and he's firing, and he's gone nuts. And he scared them, and they got out of there. I mean, they scattered. And if this had been a military action, he'd have gotten a medal. So anyway, he took Tom to a nearby house after his opponents fled, and then he rode into town, but the whole thing was over for that day. Still, a little bit later, both sides clashed at a place called School Creek, north of Lampasas, near the Higgins-Mitchell neighborhood. There was a flurry of shots in that fight, and then the Harrell brothers retreated. So the Higgins faction charged, and they found a saddle, and they got some field glasses, and they had other plunder. So that was a good fight. Pink, at this time, he is keeping his lights off in his cabin after dark because he doesn't want to be outlined against that. June 4, 1877, the flimsy Lampasas Court building. Remember, they didn't have a courthouse, so they just rented commercial space that was available. Well, somebody hit that court building, broke into it. All the district court records were stolen and presumably burned. Our governor, you know how Abraham Lincoln's our tallest president, 6'4", and James Madison, our shortest president, 6'1". Well, this was our biggest governor, Governor Richard Hubbard, 400 pounds. And he offered a $500 reward. Well, nobody was crazy enough to take that because they'd have just gotten killed. That would have been suicidal. 3 days later, on June 7th, now I've got a thing, I don't know if anybody would be interested in it, but there is an outline of this battle of the square. They had a knockdown, drag-out fight in the Lampasas Square. What happened was Pink and his guys were coming in from the north. They lived up in the north part of the county. And they were coming in from the north. And Pink, I don't know what happened. He told a bunch of his men to wait. And he went there with 3 of these brothers-in-law, Bob Mitchell, Bill Wren, and Ben Terry. And the 4 of them rode into town from the north, got to the square, and lo and behold, there were 3 of the Harrell brothers and a buddy of theirs named Jim Bob Miller. And holy cow, when they saw each other, they all started shooting. And Pink galloped out of town to go get his men and brought them back in and stuff. I like to think that maybe my great-grandfather came in with that. Nobody's named in this thing. And I thought, well, I wish he'd have done something. Well, if he'd have done something, he might have got killed and I might not be here, so that's okay. But in any event, they banged away at each other for more than 2 hours, and one guy got killed on each side, and others were wounded. The Harrell brothers then left Lampasas, and nobody saw them for about a month. Pink and his allies, they stayed on good behavior for a while until in July, a guy named Elihu Graham, a Higgins rider, got shot dead out in the countryside. So at this point, Major John B. Jones, the Ranger commander, Major Jones is the guy who put the Rangers back together. He reformed them, and he had been a major during the Civil War with the Confederates. And now he is major of Texas Rangers. And so he was the one who had put the Frontier Battalion together. He was an educated man, and thus he was a master of the peacemakers' language. It all had to do with duels and stuff. And then, right in the middle of that, at sunset on July 27th, the Higgins informant told Major Jones that the entire Hall party was back at their ranch. So Sergeant N.O. Reynolds was called in, and he was ordered to take 6 privates, so there'd be 7 of them. And it's raining cats and dogs. And so at 5 a.m., the Rangers crept into that house. Everybody's sleeping all over the floors on pallets and stuff. And all of a sudden they hollered, "Texas Rangers." I can only imagine what those guys thought. I bet some of them, thought, "Oh my God, we're fixing to get killed." But they didn't. As a matter of fact, Sam, Mart, and Tom Harrell submitted to Ranger custody, and 2 days later, they signed a truce document that Major Jones had put together. Next day, Major Jones arrested Pink and Bob Mitchell and Bill Wren. 2 days later, they signed a truce response, and that this also was written by Major Jones. In effect, he was writing to himself. And the Lampasas Dispatch, boy, they came up with something, and they said, with like World War III headlines, "Peace restored in Lampasas!" ! The Higgins and Harrell parties have laid down their arms, but don't forget, vengeance is mine. Pink is now 26. He would have no more gunfights with the Harrell brothers, open gunfights, but the events of 77 had earned him the reputation of a deadly shootist, and that reputation would continue to grow. After the Harrell-Higgins feud, life would never return to normal for Pink, even though he returned to his family and ranching. Life remained all too normal for those sorry Harrells. On May 28, 1878, a Bosque County storekeeper named J.F. Vaughn, he was murdered by a gang of horsemen who looted $3,000 from his safe. Mart and Tom Harrell were implicated, arrested, and jailed in the county seat, Meridian. We're fixed to have a lynching there. And my journey up here yesterday took me through Meridian. I stopped to get gas and to look at that fabulous old courthouse they've got. And I never have known exactly where this little stone jail was. I stopped off there a lot when I was state historian, but anyway, I never did find that out. But a Harrell rider named Bill Crabtree. Now, he rode for the Harrells, but he turned state's evidence against Mart and Tom, and then he tried to get out of town. But waiting on the outskirts of town were these gunmen with shotguns, and they blew him out of the saddle, and he died under a tree. Judge W.A. Blackburn of Lampasas County requested that Mart and Tom should be returned to Lampasas to answer questions relating to the feud. But the judge in Meridian replied that feelings were so strong that it would be unsafe for them to leave the jail. It would be unsafe for them outside the stone jail. Well, it also proved unsafe for them inside the stone jail. About 8:30 Sunday evening. This is December 15th, 1878. Over 100 masked men stormed the jail. The sheriff had been told, this is a kind of a cruel ruse, The sheriff had been told his mother was dying in another town, so he lit out to go see Mama before she died. Well, he saw her, and she was doing fine, you know. And by that time, the lynch mob had gotten in there. About 50 guys were able to squeeze their way to the Harrell cell, and they forced another inmate to hold the light while they thrust their gun barrels through the bars and opened fire. And I don't know if you know about this. Judge, you probably know about this lynching. But the best lynching in Texas had just happened about 3 years earlier in Belton. And last time I looked, that old jail building was still there. They had a brand new jail, brick jail, and it had a great big holding cell. And then there were smaller cell blocks elsewhere. And they had been having the worst trouble in Belton you ever heard, in Bell County all around. So they just got sick of it, and they had a sweep. And everybody went through there, and they finally wound up with 10 bad guys. There was rustlers and killers, and one guy had axe murdered his wife. So they threw all those guys in that holding cell. And so that night, here came about 300 guys, and the guards said, you got it. You know, they're not going to fight them for those axe murderers. And they went in there, and one of the guys was sick, and they had put him in another room somewhere else. So there were 9 guys in that holding cell. And these fellas came up, and when you think lynching, you usually think they're hanging them. Well, they didn't hang them. They stuck their rifles and pistols through the barrel, through the bars, and everybody backed up. Don't. And boy, they opened up, and they killed all 9 of those guys. And I think they were thinking of that incident when, here just a couple of years later, they are going to lynch. They're going to take those guys out, the Harrell brothers out and lynch them. They're going to shoot them. And Tom Harrell, boy, he cowered and tried to elude the bullets, but 9 of them got him, and that proved fatal. And then Mart, he rattled a cage. Now remember, this is the hero of Battle Branch, and he's hollering and cussing at him, and they're shooting him, and he's cussing them some more, and they're shooting him. He took 23 bullets before he died. The brothers died right there on the cell floor. They're buried in the Lampasas Cemetery, and the thing just says Harrell Brothers. There's no details on it. And that thing is within easy sight, just a couple of blocks away, cemetery blocks away from my grandparents' graves. It was rumored that Pink and Bob Mitchell had done it. Bob Mitchell's brother had been killed by Mart. I don't know. But anyway, here's what had happened. You hadn't kept up counts, surely. But that means that 6 of those brothers are dead. And there wasn't but 7 of them. And Sam Harrell was on bond, and he thought, man, I don't think I'm going to stick around, make it unanimous. And he jumped bail, a couple $100, went to California, and lived a long life and died in bed. So, but don't forget, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. A vendetta soon was launched against the Harrell faction by night riders. Oh, that night rider thing. On the night of April 3rd, 1879, James Collier was taken from his home and hanged from a tree. And he was a Harrell guy. And this is the note they put up. This guy didn't pay a whole lot of attention in school. And they pinned it to his chest. And it says, fair warning. Okay, he did all right with the first line. Fair warning. Every harborer, Harberer, every harborer that harbors, also misspelled, thieves, misspelled, and murderers, I don't know how you say it, murderers, M-U-R-D-U-R-E-S. Anything that harbors thieves and murderers will be served the same way. And brother, they meant it. Because 4 nights later, the night riders gunned down a guy named Bill Van Winkle at his house. And then right after that, there were these 2 guys that were related to the Harrells, Gus and William Kinchlow. Gus was gunned down at dark in his yard, and William got shot in the wrist, and he made his escape good. And then then another guy was shot dead in his yard, and it's just unreal. None of the night riders was ever identified, and no charges were ever filed. Was one of them pink? I don't know. I don't know. Sounds like something King could have done. But his riders, they might have. Anyway, it was unhealthy to speculate, and so nobody was ever charged. Pink was busy for the next few years as a trail drive. He took hers to Colorado, to Dodge City, to the Texas Panhandle. He'd gone a lot. And so his wife, Betty, got into an illicit romance with a Lampasas store clerk named Dunk Harris. Now, I don't know how stupid Dunk had to be to get into an affair with Betty Higgins, but he did. However, Pink was having enough trouble in those days anyway, and instead of killing him, the guy just moved out of town. And what he did with his wife, with Betty, he set up a buggy, put her personal belongings, clothes and stuff in the buggy, and the daughter. Remember, she had brought a daughter to the marriage. He put the daughter in there and whipped the horses, and that's the last she ever saw of anybody, including the 3 children she had given birth to. And so they got a divorce right after that. And a year later, by the way, Pink's parents were helping with the 3 little kids, Cullen, Melinda, and Tom. And then about 1 year later, Pink, 32, married Lena Rivers Sweet, and she's buried out here beside Pink. And she was 15 when they got married, and Pink was 32. Her father had recently been killed. Remember, he was sheriff, and he had gotten killed in a shootout over in Belton. And her mother had been 13 when she married the guy. And so anyway, whatever the example was, she went ahead and married Pink. Well, of course, as soon as she gets married, she's a stepmother, 15-year-old stepmother of 3. And they all loved her to death. She was an absolute sweetheart by all accounts. They just loved her to death and thought the world of her. And then she and Pink started having a half dozen more kids. She had a nautical thing about her. She named one of them Rocky Rivers. Next little girl came along, named her Ruby Lake. Next little girl comes along is Bonnie Bay, and so forth. Now, the only son that she and Pink had out of the 6 was a little boy, and he was an epileptic, and Roy died as a child. You remember seeing the movie Cool Hand Luke? Paul Newman, and he's a kind of a prisoner, and he gets into a bet, and the bet is, and all these prisoners are gambling on, the bet is that he can eat 50 hard-boiled eggs. Well, he does it. Okay, big deal. All right, let me tell you about Cool Hand Pink. Lampasas had a county fair in 1875. There was a chicken liver eating contest. And Pink, there was heavy betting, and Pink won. He ate 48 chicken livers. And the next guy, second place, he got to 28 and he just quit. He couldn't handle it. So Cool Hand Pink. Now, Pink had a meat market in Lampasas during the 80s, and he held a $100 note from a guy named L.A. Mosty. In Lampasas, Pink roughed up Mosty and made him, he made him pay. So in effect, he extorted $100 out of this guy. So Mosty got Pink indicted for aggravated assault, and the fine, $100. So that didn't work. And so in 1882, the railroad reached Lampasas that same year. And Lampasas becomes the Saratoga of the South. It had all these mineral springs, and they built a 200-room park hotel. There was nothing like it anywhere else in Texas. Sadly, a few years later, it would burn. Lampasas is shedding its violent past, and they're courting tourists. And so here is Pink Higgins. This guy was an Indian fighter, a feudist, a man killer. He was the most intimidating reminder of the wild old days. So what they did was set him up. Told you he had a meat market. In 1891, he got a wild stag in the livestock trade. A wild stag in their parlance was the brand had grown over. And so he was accused of theft and convicted in November. Huntsville, 1849, was where our first state prison was. By this time, we had so many criminals, we built another one over in East Texas at Rusk. And the heart of this one was a three-story kind of blockhouse thing. There's a huge cell block. It would handle over 1,500 people. The prison walls are gone today and the smaller buildings, but that doggone cell block is still there. And so I got to go there and take pictures of it, and I was sitting there wondering which one Pink was in. And here's the thing that happened. He wound up serving about a year. He really wasn't guilty of anything, I don't think. So his daddy brought Pink's sons, who are growing up, Cullen and Tom. Cullen attended Kilgore Business College. Tom enrolled in Tyler Commercial College. And both of them later read for law. And Pink, then, you were talking about the education thing, he sent his daughters off to Catholic school in Stamford. And that old Catholic school, which has two-story adobe buildings, is still there. So he valued education. He just didn't get much of it himself because of the circumstances under which he was raised. Well, in 1899, that's when Pink got a job at the Spurs ranch. The Spurs was two huge divisions, and the catfish ranch that he got, I don't know how he got it. I don't think it mattered to much at all. But his catfish ranch was right in the middle of these two great big divisions. Add them all up, and supposedly the Spurs had 54,000 head of cows on it. There was a Mrs. McNabb, who was the wife of a Scottish owner, and named John McNabb. And so she liked to attend the roundups. The first one she went to, there was a cowboy assigned to her and everything. And the bull calves were being branded, earmarked, and castrated. Mrs. McNabb said, "Oh, it's terrible to treat those poor little cowlets like that." Cowlets? "Ma'am," said the cowboy, "them's not cowlets, them's bullets." So, okay. Pink was a tough stock detective. This was the era of Tom Horn, and while Horn killed a couple of guys with long-range rifle shots, mostly he intimidated. And the same thing with Pink. When Pink got that stock detective, and what the Spurs had done was they had so much thieving going on, so much range to cover, that what they did was write up a thing. You can see it in their papers. They wrote up a stock detective account, and they allowed enough salary for two stock detectives, and one of them would be Bill Standifer, and the other one would be Pink, as it turned out. And there were some guys were stealing goats, and boy, they quit and left the country because they said, "Oh my God, Pink Higgins, he'll bring his own goats, and we'll be doomed." He once caught a rustler skinning a stolen cow. So he tied the green hide around him. For a day or so, the bloody, stinking hide dried out and tightened around the miserable rustler. When turned over to the sheriff, he gasped. He told the sheriff, "God, I wish Pink could have killed me." And the sheriff said to Pink, "Why didn't you kill him?" And Pink said, "He is a walking advertisement." And there's that intimidation factor. So that led to an apocryphal story, which I bet some of you have heard. Never could find any evidence that it happened. Maybe it's kin to this thing right here. The story goes that Pink was out patrolling the range, and he saw a guy was butchering a stolen cow. Without further warning, now I believe this about Pink, kablap, he shot him with his rifle and stuffed him in there. He had hair trigger. And in town, he went into town and he told the sheriff, all right, I can tell you where you can find a miracle on the range. There's a cow out there giving birth to a man. So that's a famous old story, and maybe it came from this thing. He did clash with the other Spur stock detective, Bill Standifer. He and Standifer were in Lampasas at around the same time. There was a Standifer connection to the Horrell boys, and you've seen what that connection does with everybody. It made them all crazy. And later on, Standifer out here became sheriff of two-year terms, sheriff of Crosby County for 3 terms, 6 years. And he shot at least one guy during that time. So he was a good guy with a gun and dangerous and all that. And he and Pink, just whatever the deal was back there, they couldn't let it go. And Standifer actually got fired over this. And he and Pink decided to settle it with a duel on the range. And they're going to do it at near Pink's Catfish Range. So Standifer brought some guy along that trailed him that was supposed to, be his buddy or his second or something like that. And Pink saddled his favorite mount, Sandy. Off he goes. And Lena sent her oldest child at the house, who was a girl. She went up the roof. And so she's supposed to tell her mama what she sees. Well, she didn't see anything, hardly. Well, they got up there, and apparently they were both thinking that they were going to jump off the horses with their rifles and let the horses be the shield while they popped away at the other guy. Well, nobody asked the horses about this. And so Pink, as he told about this thing, he kept looking at the left stirrup, and he figured this guy would jump off and he'd see it and he'd get first shot in. And lo and behold, Standifer gets off and gets the first shot in. And the shot hit, biggest target, Sandy. And boy, Sandy bolted and ran, and later he died. Anyway, Sandy bolted and ran, and Pink got a shot off, but he missed. And he said later, I always hate to lose the first shot. And so Standifer's horse has bolted also. And so both of them are out there in the open. And Standifer kind of panics, and he starts running around, just darting around like this, back and forth, back and forth. And Pink kneels down, and he's got his rifle ready, and he's just following that guy. And when Standifer finally decides to stop and get a shot that might kill him, he stopped, and at that point, Pink was ready. Bam, he shot him. It went through the flesh of his arm into his torso. And he staggered around for just a second, and he died. And the story goes that the guys that saw this thing said, let's bury him right here where he fell. And Pink said, heck no, that's on my land. I don't want him on my place. And they moved the body just slightly across the road and buried him where you can see him. Some of you have already seen it. And so he was dead on the spot. Pink was given self-defense, no problem. And he was 51. The last decade of Pink's life was the most peaceful, believe it or not. Cullen, very smart. He became a highly regarded lawyer and district judge, and he learned his trade, interestingly enough, in Fort Worth. Had a lot of business in Fort Worth, and then he got appointed a district judge out here, moved to Snyder. He's got a house out there. He built a one-story brick house, very nice. It's near the square. And everybody loved him. He was the best lawyer anywhere out there. And so he was highly regarded in many ways. Tom, he became a Lampasas teacher and then later county judge. And when I moved out there, everybody used to talk about Tom, about Judge Higgins. You know, he was a big dog. The daughters, they all married well. One of them married the oldest son of a Snyder cattle baron and banker, Billy Johnson. And there's a feud involved with that. That's a whole nother story. and Pink began to have grandkids. Okay, in 1909, Pink was converted by a Baptist revivalist over in Claremont. And I took a slight detour. I had to come through there. I love Claremont. I had to go through there yesterday afternoon, driving up here. And there was a church there at one time. And this Baptist revivalist baptized Pink. And so Pink said, don't go anywhere. And he rode out to his ranch, and there were 4 kids still living at home. And he brought those 4 kids out, and he had all 4 of them baptized. Then, on December 18th, 1913, he was 62. Pink arose to start a fire. December, it's cold. And he had an old board and batten house. And those old things, very drafty and so forth. And so he got up to build a fire and had a massive heart attack. He'd gained a lot of weight. You can see it in the picture of him in front of that board and batten house. He's a tall guy anyway, but all of a sudden he's really gained a lot of weight, and it killed him. And he was buried up here at Spur, and Lena later was buried beside him. And I must tell you, her children took very good care of her. Of course, she had 8 children still alive, and they took very good care of her the rest of their life. They really did revere her. Pink had survived 62 years despite Comanche warriors, personal enemies, a bloody range war, and the dangers and hardships of frontier life. There was an obituary in the Texas Spur, and I love this, and you may have seen it, Barbara, I don't know. But the editor said, the editorial we loved Uncle Pink. Uncle Pink? Yeah, I don't know. Okay. We knew Uncle Pink personally and intimately, loved and appreciated him as a real man. Boy, that part was true. He was a man true to his friends, true to his ideals, and at all times, he was a man among men. I'll just say one last thing. I thought I was through with this subject when I had done this. I started getting letters from people out here or phone calls or something and said, you hadn't finished the story yet. You hadn't told about the next feud. And I had told some about it. But I started looking into this stuff people were sending me, and I thought, oh, that's right. And so I've got another book out there called The Last Feud, Romeo and Juliet, West Texas style. And it really does have that. And it was, I think, probably the last old-fashioned blood feud in Texas. And it was very tragic, as many of these things are. But here was the greatest tragedy of all. Cullen Higgins, revered by everyone. His law office still stands on the corner of the square in Snyder. He'd gone to church on a Sunday. He came on over to Claremont from Snyder, and he was talking to the judge and another attorney from tomorrow's trial. And he was sitting there with his back to a window, and these 3 hired assassins, one of them stuck a shotgun through the curtains and shot him in the back. And they couldn't get all the buckshot out of him, and he died about a day later. And so 2,000 people, if you can imagine 2,000 people in that sparsely settled country at that time, 2,000 people came to his funeral. And so that was the worst tragedy of that last feud. Well, anyway, you've been very kind to listen to all of this. Thank you very much for coming to this event. Let me get to talk about Pink during the last chapter of his life, where it happened. Thank you so much for your kind attention. May I answer any questions about anything? Probably don't know anything else. I told you everything I know, pretty much. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh my gosh. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Barbara.